Greetings and welcome back. This is lecture 3 of the Introduction to Room 303, and I'm Mr. McGee. The assumption is that at this point you have already watched and flowed, taken notes, over lecture 1, an introduction to the guidelines, rules, logistics of Room 303, expectations, and lecture 2, which is the introduction to master scheduling and organization. Okay? I want to set up now the third lecture with another word picture, a story. As you know, I like these stories. They help. I had a student who came to me, actually not a student of mine, and he said, "Hey, dude, I heard you help students with learning problems." I went, "Yeah, sometimes." And he said, "I'm really doing terrible in math. Can you help me?" I said, "Yeah, sure." I said, "Why don't you take out your math homework from last night and just show me kind of what you're doing in terms of, your math work or whatever." So he grabs his book, his math book, and he turns his book upside down by the covers, you know what I'm talking about? And he starts shaking his book back and forth like this, and papers just start falling out of his book, right? And as he's doing this, I'm just kind of watching him, and as he's doing this, he kind of looks up at me kind of sheepishly and says, "You think this has anything to do with why I'm not doing well in math?" And I was like, "Dude, are you serious?" Of course, an organizational system will help to set us up for the kinds of learning that will make us successful. And again, we've said this maybe before to you, but the whole idea of high school is that you've got 4 years to get ready for 40 years of work. Think about that for a moment, right? 4 years to get ready for 40 years of work. And with that in mind now, the challenge for us is to do something productive in regards to our studies. Now we turn to one of the important 2 state standards for us, reading improvement. I highly recommend that you go to Learn Strong and you take a look at the annotation handout that's provided for you. It will help you to flow this lecture if you actually have that in front of you. Now again, just to remind, I'm highly recommending that not only are you flowing this lecture, so again, we have evidence, again, that's our assessment tool, evidence that you actually watch this lecture, but I'm going to recommend as well that you share this information with your significant other parent, have he or she watch it, sign again that it was done, and I can get you some plus points on your test sheet. All right, so that'll be something that we can talk more about. Let's talk through now the work of reading. Okay. The first thing you want to write down is that there's 2 kinds of reading. Okay, there's the reading that is what we will call social or survival reading, and then there's the reading that we will call academic or active reading. Let's talk about social and survival reading for a moment. Okay, this is kind of reading for fun or reading for survival. And I have students that say, "I hate to read," and I say, "No, you don't." "No, dude, I do." I'm like, "Dude, can you imagine what it'd be like to drive through downtown Denver and you couldn't read?" Right? Or going to the store and you couldn't read the labels, for example. So, this is what we call survival reading. Or, for example, the kind of reading, that, a mother came to me and said that her son couldn't read, and I said, "That's not true." And she said, "No, he refuses to read." I said, "Does he play video games?" And she's like, "All the stinking time." I said, "Just stand in a corner tonight or in the doorway behind him and just watch how much reading is taking place." Sure enough, she watched him play video games, and she was stunned that this non-reader could take in information at a split glance before he was moving on to the next information. And she, in fact, stood there long enough that he kind of noticed she was behind him going, "Mom, what are you doing?" She was like, "You're reading." He's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "You're reading. You're reading while you're playing the video game." And he's like, "Yeah." It's not a function of you can't read socially, survival reading, but we're going to talk now about a different kind of reading, and this is going to be, for your notes now, what we will call active. We have several terms for the same thing. Active reading, academic reading. Sometimes most of the time, we'll call this just simply annotation. Now, what is this kind of reading? Well, first of all, you need to write down that this is reading with the understanding that there has to be a response later. Okay? When you sit down, for example, and you just read a novel and you get to the end of the first chapter, just for fun, nobody is going to ask you a series of questions about the chapter. What was the name of the gas station attendant? No. See, that's reading for fun. But when you're reading academically, you realize that there is going to be certain kinds of responses that might be expected of you after the reading, and so you have to understand how to prepare for that kind of reading. We will read then, of course, understanding the possibility of two responses in 303. One will be an oral response. You're going to ask a question about a text and you respond orally. A second, of course, more important, is our written response. And here, of course, this is exams. This is the annotation work that we do. We're going to take notes while we read so that we can remember the important information for the exam. It's what we call mnemonics, related to memory. It helps us to be able to remember because we're going to study text over a period of several days, sometimes even weeks, excuse me, before we actually get to the work of an exam. So it'll make sense for you to prepare in advance, right? Okay? Think about it this way, and I want you to write this down. Think about the fact that we are going to try to learn. Remember, we defined that in Lecture 1 as the ability to connect new information to old information. We're going to try to learn through our reading, okay, while we're reading. Now, I want to pause right now, and you're going to want to write this down. It gets dark at night, obvious comment, but still important. Think about this. If you know that you have a text that is due in room 303 on Wednesday that you have to read, and you're not wanting to just simply take a 60%, that is to say, no-fail policy. And so you're going to read on Tuesday night to get ready for the Wednesday class deadline, right? How are you going to know what those pages are without a master schedule? So let's put this in our notes real quickly. To do annotation and active reading, you have to have a master schedule first, which tells you what work you'll be doing before you come to class, okay? Because that's important. We always read before we come to class so that we can bring our notes with us. Again, remember, we're going to share that information at the beginning of each hour, if you're not part of the NF or non-fail group. So we're always looking at our master schedule to tell us what's due for the next class session so that we're prepared, and obviously we can get our points on the test sheet, right? Now, I haven't said a lot about test sheets simply because this is, to this point, we haven't really needed to say a lot about it. You do have a copy of a test sheet. Of course, we have digitized copy online for you at Learn Strong. The idea is real simple. On the test sheet, we're simply going to list all of the readings, the annotative readings, and any of the viewings that would be required off of Learn Strong for the next exam, okay? And then when you come to class, we're simply going to mark those points down on your test sheet, allowing us to know, evidence again, that you have actually been doing some kind of reading. But what kind of reading? Yeah, not social reading, academic reading, okay? Academic reading is a different kind of reading. I had a student who went on to university and she shared a dorm room with a student who was a nursing major also, and they were in the same biology class, and at the midterm, my student had an A, and her pal had a D. And she was really fired up about it. She's like talking to my student, what is going on? And my student said to her, well, let me take a look at your textbook. And my student was, and her pal was like, what are you talking about? It's the same book. You see me reading it every night. And my student said, yeah, but I want to see if you're reading it. And now my student's roommate's getting really mad. She's like, I read it. And she said, yeah, you read it, but you read it socially, not academically. She opened her book and showed all kinds of marks on the page, what we will call internal annotation with a reading pen. And then she showed her notebook where she was taking external annotation, the kind of annotation that we use in 303, because you can't mark in your own book, right? Because you don't buy those books. But in college, you buy your own books. And the student looked back at her and said, "Oh, so there's a different kind of reading." Right. It's not like we're just reading for fun and games when we're reading, for example, at the university level or in room 303. Okay? That's not to say we can't have fun reading. Obviously, academic reading can be fun. But the first understanding is that there's going to be some kind of a response that's expected for us, all right? Let's talk now about this annotative process. I've got some information on the whiteboard behind me. There are other tutorials online at Learn Strong if you need more clarification, and obviously this little handout that I've suggested that you be looking at explains it as well for you. Let's talk through the annotative process, all right? First of all, the annotative process is really, you can do internal annotation. That's note-taking that you take in a book, but we won't be doing that because we don't own our books. So we're going to be taking what's called external annotation notes that are taken off the page on a blank sheet of paper. On that blank sheet of paper, and I've kind of put an example of it up on the whiteboard here, you can kind of see the square represents the sheet of notebook paper. Remember, that's what we work with. And of course, down the left-hand line, you've got the 3 holes here to represent that it's this 3-ring notebook paper. And then you'll notice, of course, there's always that little red line that's down the left-hand side. We're going to use that little red line as a way to kind of a line of demarcation. And then we're also going to have a line down the center of the page. This is a system that I've taught for years. It's borrowed from the Columbia's note-taking system. And I found that a very, very useful way to take pre-class and in-class notes. Because think about this. When you go into a class, I love to do this, for example, in a math class, right? You go in, you just watch students, so the instructor comes to the front of the room and says, okay, guys, today I'm going to show you something. Goes to the whiteboard. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then turns around the class and goes, any questions? And the students are all like, ah. There's always like one brave student says, can you really show that to us again? All right, watch closely. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Any questions? Of course, nobody's going to ask any questions. You don't want to look like an idiot. Okay, if there aren't any questions, then please go to page 71, do all the odd problems. I'll be at the front of the room if anybody needs any help. And then just sit back and watch what happens next. If you've been in a math class, you know this story all too well, don't you? Right? Everybody starts looking around. Do you have a clue? I don't know. There's always like 2 or 3 students that actually have an idea of what's going on, right? Okay? And so everybody kind of migrates towards them. The question is obvious. If a teacher is talking really fast and providing information, how can I write all that information down? Because, for example, when we teach our kids how to dribble a basketball when they're young, we tell them, keep your head, what do we say? Up. Think about this. If you're writing all the time the information as the math teacher's presenting it down on the paper, you're not going to be able to see actually and understand everything that's being said. So we're going to have a little suggestion in the annotative process as we outline it. That you're going to do some work before you come to class, so that while you are in class, you know what it is that you need to write down and take notes on. The first thing you're going to do physically on a blank sheet of paper, after you've drawn your line down the center, is you're going to do what we call login information. You're going to provide really good record keeping so that we have evidence that you are actually doing this reading. And the login information, you're going to always provide the name of the text, the author, and the page number out of your hymnal. Okay? You're always going to provide the date that this text will be discussed or due in class, not the date that you do it. Because if you're a good student, you're going to obviously be doing some of this work maybe even days before it's actually due. Okay? If you're college bound, for sure you need to learn this skill set. Again, you're going to draw a line down the page, or you can fold the page in half. Drawing the line is sometimes, a little bit easier. And now we're going to talk through a 3-step process that we will call 303 annotations, room 303 annotations. Simply put, for your notes as you're flowing down, 1, you're going to do some stuff before you come to class. That's what we call pre-class annotations. 2, you're going to do some stuff in class. That's notes that you're actually taking, after you've done your pre-class annotations. And then finally, 3, you're going to do what we call post-class annotations, and that, of course, is exam prep, isn't it? Getting ready for the exam, and, of course, putting together the work for the rewrite assessment packets that you have due every week. Let's now outline very quickly what each one of these different parts involve. I'm going to start with pre-class notes first. I've got the information up on the whiteboard here, and I'll just kind of reference it as I go. We're always, first of all, working with a different ink color for each one of these. Our pre-class notes we're going to do in red ink. The reason is if you are college bound and you're going to buy your textbook, you're going to be doing your internal annotations in the actual textbook with red ink. So it just makes sense to go ahead. You have the pen in your hand, right? We're going to be taking these notes in red ink. We're going to talk about 3 levels of reading. And boy, oh boy, it's important now that you sit up and pay close attention. If you're having a little bit of monkey mind problem right now, you might want to stop the video, go for a walk, and then come back so that you can really hear what I'm about to say. I'm going to walk you through this process, then I'm going to demo this process for you with a real brief poem. Okay? So that way you can get some sense of what it means when Mr. McGee says, I want you to have some annotations ready to go when you walk through that door of 303. 3 steps. What we do before class, what we do in class, what we do after class. In the pre-class section, that's what we're talking about now, and I'm working up here on the whiteboard. We're going to work with a 3 levels of reading approach that answers 3 questions when we look at a text. Now, when I say text, normally, of course, I'm talking about the stuff out of the anthologies, but quite frankly, we can use the word text to also mean movies that we watch, videos that we study, etc., etc. Okay? We're going to ask 3 questions. Level 1, what does the text say? Question. Level 2, what does the text mean? Level 3 question, how can I relate to that text in some way? All right? So 3 levels of reading. Level 2 and level 3 we will subdivide into 2 parts. So technically speaking, on your annotation, the numbering system that we'll use will be number 1, 2A, 2B, 3A, and 3B. Let's walk through it now really quickly to make sure that we understand what we're working with. Level 1 reading is simply a summary of the text. What does the text say? We are bullet pointing, I hope you know what that means, not full sentences because we don't want to waste space here. We're going to bullet point real briefly what is happening in the text. If it's a poem, what's happening in the lines. If it's a short story, we might jot down things like character, plot, summary, things like that. In other words, if somebody were to ask you what's the story about, or what's the poem about, or what's the play about, you could simply say it's a dumb text about. Okay, that's level 1. All right, basic information. Level 2, as I said, we're going to subdivide. What does the text mean? Now notice, talking about this text in terms of its meaning is different than simply saying what's in the text, all right? It's here that you get to start to think a little bit beyond the text, or into the text, or as some like to say, under the text, or through the text, all right? At level 2A, we're simply looking to bullet point 3 messages or themes from the text, okay? 3 messages or themes. And again, bullet pointing suffices. At level 2B, we're going to call this the rhetoric, or rhetorical, R-H-E-T-O-R-I-C-A-L, rhetorical. Not what the author says, but how, underline that word how the author says it. We'll sometimes refer to this as simply literary techniques. Now in your textbook, before each individual text, poem, short story, essay, whatever, there's a preparing to read page that's there that provides some basic information, it's a biography and that kind of thing. And we always want to make sure that we pay attention to those 2 pages before we actually read the text. At level 2B, we're always working with the literary analysis information that's on that preparing to read page. We always want to make sure that we provide that. At our login information, we might want to jot down a couple of pieces of information about biography, which is usually provided in regards to who wrote this text. We usually read that and kind of jot down a couple of pieces of information there as well. Okay? Again, bullet pointing. Okay? So at level 1, what does the text say? At level 2, what does the text mean? At level 3, we begin now the really important work of learning. Remember, I define learning as the ability to connect new information to old information. To go, oh, what you're teaching me is kind of like something else I already know. And at level 3, we ask this question, how does this text relate? But again, we subdivide. At 3A, how does this text relate to other texts I already know? Okay? Now here again, all you got to do is bullet point, and we're looking always for 3 texts. You simply provide the text title, and then a line that kind of explains how in some way this text relates. We always like to begin with the text that's most recent, the ones that we just previously have been studying. But obviously we can also go to movies that we've seen, videos that we are familiar with, games that we've played, music that we know, all of that constitutes as texts. And it's important that you understand, I will never ask of you in room 303 that you quote-unquote like a text. We don't even use that language in here because we're familiar that if all of us were to pull out, for example, our playlists on our iPods, we would all have different kinds of music. Some of us would have music that we love that others in the room would say, that music stinks. I never will ask you to like a text that we're working with. So you never want to come into 303 and say, I really didn't like that text. Whoa, way wrong answer. We use a different word. The word that we use is the word appreciate. Now that's a different word. You don't have to like a text, but can you appreciate the text? In other words, try to understand how the text is working in some way. Why, for example, somebody else might like this text even though you don't, right? The challenge for some of us, quite frankly, is we're still listening to the same music, for example, we were listening to in middle school. In other words, we haven't really grown our horizons very much. Obviously, a literature and a humanities course is all about trying to grow those horizons. So we're always looking to try to appreciate texts. Okay? So when we ask, how does the text relate to the text we've been studying, we're not asking you about 3 texts necessarily that you even like or enjoy. You can find a way to find a relationship, for example, between the text you're studying and the text that we studied 2 days ago, even if you didn't like the text of 2 days ago. Do you got me? At 3B, we're finally going to write actual sentences, and we usually look to write a little paragraph of 5 to 7 sentences where we answer this simple question. How does this text relate to me personally? Okay, to me personally. In other words, as I look at this text, can I find any way to understand this text and relate to me personally? We are not allowed to say, I do not relate to this text. Way wrong answer. We're really challenging ourselves to try and find some creative way to connect in some meaningful way to the text. And then we write that down. Okay? And that allows then for us to make sure that we're remembering the text in some way. The more creative that you can do that, the better. Okay? For example, I had a student who loved humor, and he would write funny little paragraphs to try to remind himself something important about the text. Right? So that's pre-class. That's the work that you do on your own in red ink without anybody's help. Okay? All by yourself. The next thing that we'll talk about now is the next step in the annotative process, and that's what we do, quote-unquote, in class. All right? Now, the in-class annotation is done with blue or black ink, and it's done on the right-hand side of the line. All right? Basically, we're looking for 2 pieces of information while we take in-class notes. And again, this is work that's done after we've already done our own work on the left-hand side with red ink. Okay? First, we're looking for what we call match information. Match. Anything that is said by the instructor that you also have written down already. There isn't any reason to write it down a second time. And because you're working with a different color system, you can simply put a star or a circle or some kind of underlining of the information that you've already written down on the left-hand side of the line. If it's mentioned by the instructor and you also wrote it down, there's a really good chance it's going to end up on the exam. Does that make sense? In other words, we're already preparing for the exam by saying, oh, whoa, if the instructor mentions it, and it was in the book and I wrote it down, there's a real good chance that's going to end up on the exam, and I definitely want to circle, star, etc. I mean, I was giving this lecture once years ago, and I challenged my math students to go into the math classroom the next day, but the night before to do the sample problem that was going to follow the instruction. Just do the sample problem. Just work it on your notes and then bring those notes with you to class. And the math teacher came in the next day and said a really weird thing happened. I was working the sample problem like I always do on the whiteboard, and at the very back of the room a student went, oh, no way! And I thought somebody had spilled something, whatever. I turned around and I said, is there a problem? And the math teacher said, I asked, is there a problem? And my student who was sitting in the back of the room, she said, oh, you're doing the sample problem right out of the book. The math teacher said, honey, we've been doing the sample problem every day. Oh, well, if I do the sample problem on my own before I come to class, then when the instructor's up here on the whiteboard writing it down, I don't have to write it down. I can actually sit and watch her do it with my head, remember what we told our basketball players, up. And if I do have a question, because last night I tried to work the problem on my own and it didn't make sense to me, now I can ask the question when she turns around and says, are there any problems? Right? Which means now I can begin the process of answering those questions in class, those problems, solving those problems in class right away. Learning, right? So in class notes, match information. Number 2, new information. Now this is stuff that's not in the text that the instructor, Mr. McGee, is going to say in class. Okay? We definitely want to write that down, because if Mr. McGee takes time to say it, there's a real good chance it also might end up on the exam. Now, if you'll think about it, we can skip ahead for just a second. If you know everything that's match information and everything that's new information, what could an instructor ask you on an exam that you don't already know? Think about that. Because the instructor puts anything on the exam that's not match or new information. That's unfair. This actually happened to a student of mine. Went to university, took an exam, came up to the prof after the test and said, there were several questions on the exam that you never covered in class and weren't in the textbook. And the prof, what are you talking about? Yes, of course I. And my student took out her annotations, showed the instructor, look, this is my match information, this is the new information that you reported in class, You ask 7 questions on the examination that covered material that you did not cover and was not in the textbook. And all of a sudden he got a funny look on his face and he said, oh, you know what? I'm using an old test from a textbook from the last semester, and we went to a new textbook and that information wasn't in the textbook. I can't ask those questions because it's not fair. I've got to remove those 7 questions. And of course, my students, colleagues were way happy that she had saved all of their grades. Of course, here's the thing. If you haven't done pre-class work, you're not going to know what new information is being provided. Make sense? Major problem for university students. So for example, in biology, I won't read the textbook, I'll just come to class and write everything down. That's great for the match information, but what about for the new information? Right? The stuff that ain't in the book. And I didn't get it the first time when the instructor was producing it in class. Now I'm trying to go to the text to read it, and it's not in the textbook. Now we got issues, right? As we work through then this work, match information, new information, we want to pay attention. Now there's 2 places where we can get this in-class information. The first is on the LearnStrong videos, and if you go to learnstrong.net, you will see for your class, there's a file down the left-hand side, there are a series of videos that have been produced. You simply will watch the videos the night or the days before the class session, and you just take notes looking for match and new information. Of course, the second place will be actually in class, when I actually go through material in class and you're taking notes. Okay? Of course, post-class annotation work, exam prep, you're going to use your annotations to prepare for the examination questions, and the study groups that I'm going to recommend are really important and vital. They can help you. Okay? So there you go, an introduction to annotation. Let's just practice really quickly. Go to learnstrong.net and find the handout that's provided for you there that just simply says an annotation practice or sample. And this is Wordsworth's little poem, The Rainbow. Okay, take a look at it. My heart leaps up, Wordsworth says it this way, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began, so is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. Now really quickly, let's practice an annotation. And it would make sense if you want to actually print that piece of paper from LearnStrong so that you're looking at the poem itself, or go online, Google, and find the poem. Let's do a quick annotation. Level 1, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. I get happy when I see a rainbow. So was it when my life began? When I was young, I loved rainbows. So is it now I am a man? I love rainbows now. So be it when I shall grow old. I hope I even like rainbows when I'm an old man. Or let me die. Whoa. The child is father of the man. Now that's an interesting one, but we would write it down maybe in our best way that we could. Child is father of the man. A few years ago, a student of mine said, I think I kind of understand this. I'm just a few days away from graduating, and my mother is not handling it very well at all. And the thought occurs to me, she says, you know, it's a funny thing. Parents raise us to a point, and then we turn around and raise them. Several of my seniors in the room went, oh, I totally get it. The child is father of the man. There are things that children teach adults, like the appreciation of rainbows. Children love rainbows. By the time we get all grown up, we have a tendency to not see the value of a silly thing like a rainbow. Right? And I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. Piety here just simply means living a good life, simple life. Level 2A, what's a possible single message for this one? Well, I mean, we mentioned a couple already, obviously, to try to live your life with some sense of joy, some sense of wonder and curiosity. Level 2B, well, let's think about this for a moment. This is, again, rhetoric, not what the author says, but how the author says it. Let's just concentrate, for example, on one single literary device that's poetic, rhythm. So, for example, I can say it this way, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. Or I can slow it down and pay attention to the rhythm and say, my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. That's what we call an iambic foot. It's a certain kind of rhythm. Wow, interesting. What about 3A? Is there a favorite text for you that comes to mind? Maybe a movie that says, that teaches, you should treasure every day because they're so important, we don't have very many of them. And finally, what is your thought about rainbows? Or what is your thought about living your life with joy? Or what is your thought about understanding the relationship between teaching a parent something valuable? When was the last time that happened for you? That the parent had to admit you were right and the parent was wrong. That's an interesting moment, isn't it? Sometimes parents don't always celebrate that moment, do they? Okay, let's turn now to finish the reading, writing assessment packets. I'm hoping that you will take a look now at LearnStrong, or the information that was provided for you already in class. And this is an understanding of the cover sheet for our reading and writing assessment packets. Now, every week, we will hand in what we call our reading, writing assessment packet. Again, got to have evidence. It's not good enough to tell Mr. McGee that you read the material or that you wrote a paper. You actually have to give me some evidence of that. And the way you'll do that is in a packet where there will always be a cover sheet. I write it down this way. Think of it as a table of contents, okay? Where you're going to list the information that's actually in the full packet. However it's listed on the table of contents, the cover page, that's how it will appear in the actual packet itself. And then you're going to staple these packets and you're going to submit them to me by 3:30 of the day they're due. So you have all day to get them put together on the day they're due. You'll kick them to me through the Omega file in GradeBand. Let's talk through it real quickly, shall we? First of all, the cover sheet has to be typed. Can't be handwritten unless you're an NF student, okay? And again, using the cover sheet that's provided for you as a master online is a simple way to do this, and then just save it as a template. Okay? The first thing you're going to do is log in with your name, the date that it's actually due, not the day you do it, and then what packet number it is. That's important, and that's, of course, going to be provided right on the course outline. You're going to list, under a heading that says Annotations, all of the annotations that were assigned, in other words, the ones that have been given in the master schedule. Whether you did them or not, you'll always list them. Okay? And you're going to provide the annotations then listed one right after the other, down the left-hand side. First by the title of the text, then the author of the text, and finally the page number range from the textbook itself. Okay? Then, depending on what you have done in this packet, you're going to have different kinds of language with different kinds of ink. If everything for you is completely done for each one of those annotations, then after each one of those annotations, you're going to write with blue or black ink the word complete. If you've got some of the work done, but not all of the work done, you're going to switch and you're going to go to red ink and you're going to write the word partial right after each one that's only half done, partially done. All right? So for example, you got the actual work done, pre-class work, but you, for example, didn't watch the Learn Strong video. You shouldn't do it. That will constitute as partial. Or, if you haven't done any of it, you're going to write the word incomplete in red ink after each one of those. All right? Now, as you continue on your cover sheet, just to remind, if you are a NF student, you still are going to have the annotations that you're doing in class with Mr. McGee. And so those will be a part of your read-write packet. Okay? You're obviously going to, as well, then have all of those annotations in a row right behind your cover sheet. All right? So you're going to have those provided, ultimately, as part of your packet. And then right behind that, you're going to have the information of the writing assessment. I'm going to talk more about this in the next lecture. But on the cover sheet, you're going to actually have a section that's headed called Writing Assessment. You're going to provide the actual page number for the assigned topic, and then you're going to actually tell us what the assigned topic was, and then you're going to have some thesis and POV information that I'll talk about in the next lecture that's going to be listed right there. Okay? Finally, at the very bottom of your cover sheet, you're going to provide me with some important scoring rubric information that will be listed at the bottom of the cover sheet. Okay? If you are an NF student, you're only seeking a score of 60 on the packet, then you're going to type capital N, capital F right at the very bottom, or you're going to handwrite it in red ink at the bottom, all right, of the spaces that are provided. First of all, you're going to provide a space for me for annotation score. You're just going to write the word annotation score and then provide a line. I'll score your annotations. Then you're going to provide me with a writing assessment score, and you're going to provide that again with a line there, okay? And you're also going to provide me with the opportunity to say what level I've been reading your essay at level 1, 2, or 3, something I'll talk about in lecture 4. Okay, and then finally you're going to provide a final score section. You'll provide a line, just like that handout that you're looking at has. All right. Final thoughts here. Finally, I suggest that you create a template for yourself so that all you have to do is just update it every week. You can always use the one on Learn Strong, and I recommend that you use it as your guide. The read-write packets, again, are due by 3:30 in the grade bin through the Omega file, right? And again, after that date, the packet will just receive a score of 60. So in other words, if it's due on a Wednesday and you hand it in Thursday, it's late, you get a score of 60. If you have a reason that's legitimate for why you could not hand that in, you're going to be writing that with red ink at the bottom of your cover sheet. Mr. McGee, I was gone on a ball trip yesterday. This was due. I am handing it in today. I have 1 day to make it up. by 3:30, therefore I should be able to receive full points. All right? Obviously, if you have any questions you want to ask, but you want to ask before the day it's due, right? Of course, the day it's due, you always have time until 3:30, so some of you can get work done during the day, orange period, or whatever. Finally, I would suggest this in final comments. Think about that little poem that we just looked at. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. I want to challenge you to develop a sense of wonder, a sense of joy, as was expressed in that poem. Try to learn, to love, to learn. Because when you were younger, this poem suggests you did that very thing. You loved rainbows for no reason other than what? They were rainbows, right? Best of luck. Thank you.